Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of the Code and Coffee Show. Like always, we will focus on two most important things in the life of most developers: on code and code-related stuff, and of course on coffee that, in most cases, runs through our veins for all the time. So with me, I have Richard Spindler, and Richard published his first open source project in 2003 and started working professionally with C++ in 2012. Today, his obsession is advocating for test driven development, continuous integration, and extreme programming techniques in software development. I must say that your intro, especially using those words like extreme test-driven development, was the most intimidating of all of them. But still, that's why today we will talk about rescuing legacy software. And this is quite an important topic because more and most of us are running in the software that someone created at some point, and we are not sure what to do with it at some point. Should we rewrite it? Should we just I don't know, change our jobs to and count that we will find a job where we won't have to deal with such software, or maybe something else? But first, Richard, are you a coffee drinker?
Absolutely, yes. All the time,
That's
every day. So I guess it gets me started. Although today I actually ran out of coffee, but I'll survive.
to be honest, today is it seems it's an unlucky day because I also ran out of coffee and I'm here with a glass of water. Yeah, and I'm in Spain, so I'm really far away from my favorite coffee shops, and I'm not fully um, found a perfect place to buy coffee here. But yeah, I have to survive. I will travel to Malaga tomorrow just to refill all my things. If I remember, you are from Berlin, right?
Yes, I'm from Berlin, and it's almost snowing right now. No, it just stopped snowing, but it was snowing 20 minutes ago. The weather is
But
bad, but we have a public holiday. It's Women's Day, and every
oh,
shop is closed in Berlin today.
that's
Yes.
interesting to hear. But I wanted to mention that Berlin is really famous from many of it coffee roasteries like Five Elephants
Oh,
or
yes, it's just like next door. That's where I live.
you.
Yeah.
You are
I live I
you
lived even
you're such a
closer
lucky
to
person.
Five Elephant. Now I think I have to cross the street to get there.
You are such a lucky person, really, really. I must say that I would really love to live near either Five Elephants or the barn, because the barn was also I also very enjoyed the coffee there. So both places are totally fine with me. Um, yeah, and what is your favorite coffee for those snowy days? Something with milk or still a
I
filtered
have
coffee?
to admit I drink a lot of milk in my coffee. I
Mhm.
usually have a latte macchiato, but I don't have sugar. So that's like the healthy element that I kind of leave out the sugar.
Oh, that's really good to hear. I like the coffee that I ran out of it. I forgot the roastery, but it was really so amazing. It had this nice little aftertaste of strawberries. Really amazing thing. So probably I will try to share the link with everyone after the show, so you all can have a chance to buy it and give it a try. So before we'll dive into rescuing legacy software, yeah, the bills won't pay itself. But I am the lucky one, and I have a nice sponsor. It's Kinsta, and the next 20 seconds are on them. So see you in a while.
Kinsta's application hosting simplifies the work of modern web developers. With just a few steps to get your app up and running with performance backed by the fastest Google C2 machines, Kinsta has built a development platform designed to get your applications in front of users as quick as possible. Test Kinsta's application hosting for yourself at kinsta.com. The first $20 are on us.
And we are back. So let's start with the most obvious question. How do you define legacy software? Is it the old software or the software that isn't working, or what is your take on this?
I have a simple definition, but I brought like some piece of legacy hardware for you, which I promised to show you, which I didn't bring up yet. It's like on the low end of coffee making. Do you know this one?
No, I don't, to be honest.
It is like it has a special insides. I have to show it in the camera.
Oh.
It's a percolator.
Oh my, that's interesting. To be honest, I never saw something like this.
It is something I bought it and I never used it. But like it's, I think, about making Wild West style coffee. You would put it into the fire and kind of make your coffee directly outside in the countryside over the fire.
Interesting.
But I haven't got around to do it yet, so it's really kind of a like fun item.
So this is an example of legacy coffee equipment, but
that's very legacy, I guess. Yeah.
In a way, it works probably. Let's
absolutely, and I think that is like the part of the definition, I think, of legacy software, and that is.
But no one would like to use it. No one would like to use it right now because it would require starting a fire, going outside.
It's more a romantic idea of, living in the wild. Yeah. But going back to legacy code definition, I think my favorite definition, and I don't know if do you know Michael Fetters? He's kind of the legend of legacy code. He's written a big book about it. And his definition.
I heard the name, but didn't read the book.
Yeah, he makes a very simple definition, and that is code without tests. But if you put, I think, a bit on top of that, I think personally, and I think of many other people, the core definition is also that it must be code that is actually being used, that is actively used, that kind of performs some business function, some useful function, some function that makes money for the business or so. So, and it doesn't have test, and of course, and then you can kind of go further. What else is maybe wrong with that? But yeah, it must be valuable. It must be useful. That is. And the reason for that is because if it would not be useful, if it was just like some stuff that you have sitting in the closet, then why would you want to rescue it in the first place? Other than being an archaeologist who cares about the past.
Yeah, but I agree. This is a very good definition because. In most cases, when we start talking about legacy software, one of the arguments about not touching but it gives us money. It works. No one quite know why and how, but it works. So we prefer not to touch it because this is in most cases like the continuation of the thought about why this piece of software never was rewritten or anything related to it, because it works and that's it.
Yeah, maybe it does something so important that nobody wants to dare to break it, and that is of course. Well,
so what might be the problems we can experience when working with such code? Of course, we already know that it doesn't have tests, so it's like a ticking bomb that we are all afraid to touch because we never know when and how it will explode. But what
Yeah,
else?
and I think for me personally, I don't know, I started doing software because I was a computer enthusiast. Programming was first a hobby and later became a profession. And everybody who kind of shares this story, I think you have those days where you remember back to the time when you were programming just for yourself, for fun, maybe for your friends in school, uh, and you could do whatever you want, and then suddenly, I mean, if you were unlucky, you suddenly find yourself in a company, in a project which is kind of stressful to say the least, which really kind of has difficulties and has like a kind of a very, like, I don't know how to word it, a working environment and a code base where you kind of maybe wake up in the middle of the night sweating and being afraid of going to work the next day. And that is kind of, I think, my personal goal is to kind of say, what if I could go to my day job where I work professionally under deadlines, under pressure, under stress, and kind of go back to the feeling that I had when I was just a little kid playing around with computer code and minding my own business, writing my little toy programs, doing whatever I wanted and be happy with that. What if I could go back? No.
This is really interesting because I thought that you will start pointing out some technical issues, but to be honest, your approach is totally valid. I remember at my previous job, I had the chance to do an interview with Luke Downing, who is one of the maintainers of past PHP. So it's a it's a testing framework for PHP, and he also kind of shared this story when he started. And he also was a person who was self-taught. He started creating his code, and at some point it became business. And when it became business, they very quickly, because he was doing this with a friend, they found each other in this situation when they were afraid to add changes because they were afraid that something will break. So it wasn't strictly technically; it was all about what's happening in your head, and this is something that you just covered. And to be honest, I never thought about legacy code in such way because mostly I thought of it from the technical point of view, but. You are right. You are totally right. But still, there is also a lot of modern code with that is just written and it doesn't have tests. So, is it by the definition legacy the moment when it was produced?
Yes.
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 Yeah.
And I mean, and the thing is, I think we are starting out with this kind of idea that you have legacy projects and that you have like healthy projects. But of course, there's a large gray area in between. I would say every developer, every project has parts of the code base which could be defined as legacy, which probably don't have the tests, I mean, that they should have or could have. So, like, depending on the day and on the part of the project, everybody may work with such code, and that's why I think it's like useful for every programmer to be prepared and to kind of be unafraid to go into these dark areas, right? And because but you wanted to go also in the technical side, and I mean, apart from no tests, of course, it comes to a lot of other things which also can be like slow builds, for example. I would also count towards that because it kind of perpetuates the problem. And
But again, I would say that slow tests will again be one of these problems. Then you will have this feeling that you don't want to work on the project. Why? Because we have slow tests and it takes a lot of time. So again, there is this technical part, but again, the project becomes also in your head because you feel that you don't like to work with it because like the project is fighting with you and not the other way around, that you are just writing your stuff and not worrying about this. But there is one part about always the word legacy. I always connected legacy with something old. And you just define that the age of the code kind of doesn't matter in this case. It's that legacy is only connected to quality.
True, and I think there is also one thing which could be said about old code and new code, and maybe puts another spin on the word legacy, or one of the problems that are usually common in these kind of code bases is also outdated dependencies, like old, extremely old versions of libraries, extremely maybe old requirements on which compiler or runtime, like PHP 5 or so, for example, which is, this, and it all goes together, you come back also to, okay, but without tests, you cannot upgrade, because you don't know if you are not confident if it will work. So even if you encounter this, it actually takes you back to, okay, yes, it's a problem, but it's also a problem because there are no tests, because a well-tested PHP 5 code base, you may feel confident to move it forward quickly using tools like Rector or so. It should be rather painless, actually,
Yeah, but still, without tests, you won't be 100% sure that it's working as it should.
Yeah, and that's why I think it makes sense to have the definition as it is.
I must. I totally agree. I mean, coming to this episode, my approach was also with the date, but I think I can totally agree with you that it's that legacy. It's more about quality. So we can maybe we shouldn't call it legacy. It's just bad written code.
Yeah, and then there's also, I think this is one of the aspects. Software developers like you and me, I think we get that it's always good to be like on the latest version of everything to kind of try to keep your stuff updated. But I think in the embedded world, especially when it is about devices that are kind of standalone, it's like, I don't know, it's maybe totally okay to use the same firmware for 10, 20 years if it's a simple device and it performs its function, But
because it works. Yeah,
because it works, but as even these type of devices get connected to the internet, I think this understanding, like this feeling of safety falls apart, because suddenly you will have vulnerabilities, and on an unconnected device, it doesn't matter, but as soon as it is connected, I think you should no longer kind of follow that strategy, because even if the software is perfectly fine, it will become unfine, because people will find a way to break it remotely, and then things go downhill.
Yeah, because this is kind of this engineering fault. If something works, don't touch it. And the moment when we connect this thing to the internet, sadly, this approach
it doesn't hold anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Also, interesting thing. And tell me, can you imagine that? Yeah, you have this huge code base, and there is this legacy part. Are there any situations when we should just leave it as it is? don't touch it because it works.
I guess there are situations. I mean, this is hard to judge, right? If it does perform its function, if it's been tested by experience because it runs, I don't know how many transactions every day, it's robust, it doesn't break, it doesn't need any change because it's the way it is, then I guess, I mean, like I think it's also, you can break that question or that problem even down to like not the whole project, but like parts of the projects. Are there parts of the project that you should not touch? And absolutely, I guess, even if it's like a project that is so big that it's overwhelming, it is good advice to say, okay, we are not going to touch this part of the code base for now because we don't need to touch it right now. It's been proven to work, and it doesn't require change. So let's put that, for a little bit of later or not at all, maybe. I mean, I think it's a decision that must be made on a very fine-grained level,
Exactly. I mean, I have a quote for this situation because during PHP UK, during one presentation, someone quoted Alan Ullman, and it's a very interesting thing. We build our computer systems the way we build our cities, over time, without a plan, on top of ruins. And this is kind of this. This is exactly kind of this. There is this core. That it works, and because of many different business decisions, those business decisions aren't a long-term plan. This is something that happens, and we have to add functionalities. And there is also a lot of ruins, like code that isn't used for many years, but it's just left because no one knows what to do with it. So yeah, this is I think a really perfect analogy of computer systems.
True.
Yeah, we can really compare like cities to computer system when we have this old town which isn't as functional as the modern constructions, but it has its role. It attracts, for example, tourists. And near we have those more modern streets that are, let's say, more accessible. So in a way they are better, but still people prefer to go to the old town because it's historical. It has, and underneath there are some ruins, for example, of even sometimes some even the Roman Empire, because why not? The city was built on other ruins. So yeah, it's I can really see it how it also works in software development, because it's quite similar, but software development happens much faster than city building.
I guess. I mean, like I think every Android phone runs Linux, and Linux is kind of imitating Unix, and Unix is quite an old
Exactly.
idea, and it's still kind of, you can't get it out of this system easily. It's just too much of it is built into the foundations of everything that comes on top.
Or on the other hand, when we see how many things that Windows also passes from version to version just to keep everything backward compatible. And backward compatibility, because this is also a very interesting aspect. What's your take on this? Should we or should we not care about backward compatibility?
I mean, I'm maybe like in that case old and grumpy, beardy guy who says, of course, you should care about backwards compatibility. And I have one example. Maybe it's not so much about it's intertwined. Backward compatibility. I also sometimes use the term breaking changes. Change something that breaks somebody else's, I don't know, idea of the system. And don't get me started on that. I don't really like it for also other reasons. And I think here we're already touching into the realm of extreme programming. And also thinking about continuous integration, continuous deployment. If you kind of want to work really professional, you have to consider it. I don't like breaking changes because usually the impact of breaking something is almost always bigger than whoever broke the things intentionally imagined. Because it can have wide-ranging. I have seen it a couple of times that people would say, we have a method here. It's part of a public API. We will add another parameter. Nobody will mind, Like, I don't know, 3 weeks later, people are still trying to figure out
what happened.
What happened?
Why their code suddenly stopped working? And especially that everything is connected. We are using so many ways to automate our update process, like having dependency managers. So very often we don't have the full control over what's happening. And if the versions weren't if the versioning weren't done good enough, we might see that after a day our software is broken because something updated.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the idea. I think also in Android it's sometimes done to have something like a compatibility layer. Even if you think you must introduce like a new API that is incompatible, or so that you provide some kind of support library that implements the old API on top of the new API as a crutch. That is often, I think, if you kind of want to make other people using that code happy, a good way. And I think in Android it is even the other way around. I think it is sometimes that kind of modern APIs get implemented on top of older Android SDKs so that you can have your app that runs on a modern phone easily backported to an older phone. I think it comes at some cost because that compat library adds a few megabytes to your package, but nevertheless, I guess it is valuable to do these type of layers and wrappers and keeping compatibility. So, yeah,
I understand. And so at this point we mostly discussed the problems, and but I think that the answer is simple right now. So what we can do to rescue software.
What we can do to rescue software. Yeah, and I will go right down there. And I just recently saw like an interesting, maybe opinion piece or blog post on Hacker News. I tried to look up the link, but I think it was last week and the feed already scrolled by and I couldn't easily find it. But it was about projects maintained by a single developer. And what are it was about the pains or the disadvantages or the problems or the dangers of these type of situations.
The core JS probably.
Maybe. I just remember the overall idea that I got out of that article. And thinking about legacy software, I mean, many types of advice or refactory guidelines jump directly into the code. But I also like to look at it from a higher level and start to look at the team level, like who is maintaining the project. Maybe it's a new team that took it over, but maybe it is, the very team that created this legacy project now wants to rescue the legacy project. And then, I think it's if you have a situation where you have like a single programmer, and I think I have heard that story at some occasions, that a company is frantically searching for a new programmer because their old programmer left, surprisingly, and they have a big code base and nobody to maintain it. And then I feel projects are more robust if you have a team, and if you're also planning for adding new members to the team if you lose somebody who kind of quits the company or whatever, people move on or go to other projects. So I would say if you want to rescue legacy project, the first thing is to make sure that you have a team to actually rescue it, to start there, and be sure that you can start there.
Or at least have procedures to introduce new people quickly. I mean, it's kind of called having a good documentation.
It helps.
It's
it helps.
Very helpful.
It helps. Yeah.
Regarding our previous thing that we discussed, Christian asks us, I think, shouldn't there ever be any new major version of software? As you're saying, you don't like breaking changes at all?
I think, yeah, it's a good question, and I think it has a very specific answer, and that answer is it depends. On the project. I mean, I am kind of, I see the point. I think at Microsoft, they always put like a very, very big focus on keeping older apps running in their operating system. They would like sometimes resort to nasty tricks to have drivers behave different. I don't know, there was like some story about SimCity at one point, that some Microsoft Windows would behave differently if it sees like SimCity starts, because SimCity is like depending on some bug in the OS, and that bug was fixed, but and so on and so forth. I'm pretty firm in that camp. I mean, if you can afford to do that. I mean, Microsoft probably has also the money to throw at this problem. Yeah, but that's a good question. I think it's also a question about versioning schemes of software, how to version your software, when to upgrade to a major version, which is usually an indicator for breaking changes. Yeah, I think it's a very big topic. It will be hard to cover. I think it's just there is this accepted convention, I think, of major, minor, and patch level versioning, which many projects use. When it comes to me, I'm also not so much in this camp of software developer who do care a lot about version numbers. I think it started happening when I first learned about the versioning scheme of Google Chrome, the browser, which I think they just went wild. They did like, there's a completely different approach. I think they had like very large numbers, and they pushed constantly updates, and at one point you wouldn't even care. You wouldn't even know what version you are running. It just became a minor detail of the software development process, and you would just run the latest version. And so I see myself in this camp, and I don't care so much anymore about versions of software. I care about compatibility.
I mean, maybe this was the thing that Google was after, because to be honest, when you mentioned it, they totally changed the approach how we look at versions of the browsers. Because before, especially for me, it was very important which Internet Explorer are we comparing to. And suddenly it's like, yeah, it's Google Chrome, it's Edge. I don't care. I don't care. It should work, and everyone should. Of course, many things has changed because we are kind of going away from the main topic, but this is quite interesting, that also the way how we update software changed. Because before, like, Internet Explorer was baked into core, and right now we are just updating somewhere in the background. We don't know, we don't care. It it works,
It was
or at
works.
least or
Uh,
at least it should. Yeah, yeah. And tell me, because yeah, this is the the fact of having the team to that will be even able to rescue our software. Yeah, this is also something interesting. But what can we do to make sure that our software won't become obsolete, like right right after writing it, or quite quickly?
yeah,
Apart from writing tests.
for it. Do we have a paying customer? I think I don't know. Maybe that is like a capitalistic mindset, but I think that is as a major like motivation. If somebody uses it, it pays for it, then it makes probably sense to keep it going and not throw it away. But looking at the technical side of it, that's like also, of course, what happens a lot, I think, in project is that code is thrown away,
Mhm.
but not because the customer would not pay for it, but for technical reasons. And that is, I think, one of the lessons learned from the extreme programming philosophy is,
Mhm.
I mean, if you write something, try to integrate it into your, trunk immediately, because, and that is what I see in my professional life very often, is that people start with big ideas, make like
Mhm.
huge branches, start major features, and then like they have a lot of code written, and then I looked like 3 months later, there is an open merge request somewhere at the end of the list, and nobody's gonna look at it ever again, um, because it was too big to reasonably integrate it, and suddenly the
Mhm.
focus has shifted and the effort was lost. And then sometimes it makes sense, if you are thinking about, this was a spike, you wanted to explore an option, and you notice that this approach doesn't make sense, so we are throwing the spike away. But then I would say you should also really delete it and kind of, consciously throw it away, because otherwise you have that mental burden that somewhere deep down at the end of your list of merge requests, you have something which you should look at, but you will never get the time to look at it. It creates a drag on you. And so that is, that's unfortunate. I like to avoid that situation.
And on the other hand, for the developer, it's kind of difficult to consciously press delete because they see we put so much work into it.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
This is. We will branch back to the topic of versioning because Christian continues, and it's really interesting. Wanted to say about if you're actually able to introduce any breaking change, as for example in browsers. Oh, it's sorry. It's okay. I understand. Thank you. I think it's also a little about philosophy and also about, and this is the continuation. Yeah. So, how would you introduce a breaking change in, for example, in a browser that just updates somewhere in the middle and no one cares when?
No, I mean, there is one thing I would, if I would be in the position, if I would really kind of do the best I could to introduce a breaking change, I would try to do it in a way that nobody notices. And if the application would provide the data, for example, that you actually look at your usage data and you see there is like no user left using that feature, okay,
Mhm.
now maybe it's the time to remove it or something like that. If you support some really kind of obscure file format and you actually see, okay, 0 people are using that, okay, let's remove that, for example. But I mean, or if like it's really the cost of maintaining something, is so high that nobody is paying for it, then may make sense to remove it. But for me, I'm talking about professional software development, and that is software development for money, and then it's always also a business decision. I mean, if it's unreasonably expensive to keep something compatible, if it's free, if it's just about keeping something in and not deleting that method, or having like, write a little wrapper so that it will still work, even it's a little bit hacky, but it doesn't break anything, keep it compatible. If there is money for keeping it compatible, if it can be paid for, I would do it.
And if there is no money, just delete.
Do it.
Yeah.
Business-driven development. Yeah.
True. It's also true. And tell me, what are, or if there are, some universal rules about which should we remember while starting our next project to make sure we won't have to rescue it quickly?
Universal rules. I would say the universal rules these days is you should have a continuous integration workflow. You should have a build server. You should use version control, which seems like obvious today, but wasn't that obvious just a short time ago. So
I would say it still isn't.
Do the things. Use Git, set up Jenkins or GitHub Actions or whatever works for your project. Have that. Enable yourself to write tests. Have the boilerplate ready. Have a job, even if you have 0 tests because you're starting the project. Already have like a job, have like a build step that runs the still not yet existing tests. Like, make it easy for yourself to write tests. I think that is the crucial thing to keep in mind. If you are serious about the project, if you actually want to do a good job, always make it easy for you to write the test. Otherwise, I mean, I think that's just should be like and I think like frameworks like I don't know, when it came out, Ruby on Rails or so, they would automatically set up the project structure, and of course that would include a test harness or something like that. And I think it's important to have that if you are just starting on a new effort.
And any tips about because writing code is much simpler because you just create than starting to write tests, because for some reasons there are we have a lot of developers who know how to write code, but for some reason don't write any tests. Do you have some advice how to start? What should be the first steps?
I have some mindset advice first, because I think learning to write code in the test-driven design way, it is hard, because if you have learned to write code without tests, you have to convince yourself that it's useful, and at first you will feel like a beginner and you will feel uncomfortable, and so you have to get into the right mindset that it is worth the pain to go through the learning process, I think, to keep that motivation. And I would recommend, which is completely unusual advice, to watch Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares. That was really eye-opening for me. And now I will kind of try to make the connection. Lots of people cook. Lots of people cook in their homes, are home cooks. But there are also restaurants with restaurants cooks. And there is a difference between being like a hobby cook who cooks at home, who cooks maybe for a family or friends, and somebody who cooks in a restaurant and is a professional cook working in the service industry. And I think you have to understand that if you want to be a professional software developer, if you want to write software for business and not as a hobby, you have to understand that you must do things differently in the same way that watching kitchen nightmares will teach you that people who work as a cook or in a restaurant must do things differently than home cooks. And that starts with basic stuff like hygiene, like keeping the food clean. Do not poison your customers by having, making a mess in your kitchen. And that is the mindset I like to keep. That I'm now a professional. I want to work professionally. I have to take care that I don't poison my customers. I mean, I will not poison them, but that I will cause harm unnecessarily because I am. Some people would say it's laziness to not write tests, but these type of labels, calling people lazy doesn't help. It's but it needs. You need to understand that it's part of your job, simply. And then I think you may get some motivation out of it to start learning about test-driven development. And for me right now, that is, I think, what in this year differentiates a professional developer from a hobby developer. And that is also, I think, if I am interviewing a person for a programmer's job, I want to at least see that the person is open for the idea of learning test-driven development, even if in their current position they didn't get the opportunity, or if the company or business or project wasn't structured in a way that they would do that. But that is like one of the things that I'm really looking for in a software developer.
To be honest, I never thought that that we would be using a connection with Gordon Ramsay in Code and Coffee
Yeah,
Show,
I love
but,
this.
and honestly, it's a really good connection, and I also like it, and because today you also mentioned that everything in the project is kind of business-driven development, and I can tell you from my perspective that many companies, for some reason, don't have time to write tests. This is their approach. We won't write tests because we don't have time, but they have always all the time in the world to fix everything, mostly on production. This is kind of this always kind of amazes me how business-driven development and test-driven development are in many cases so against each other, and they should be working hand in hand, because having a working software, is the most important part of our job, to have a working piece of software. That's it. That's why they are paying us. And when you mentioned kitchen nightmares, so let's go into the biggest legacy code nightmares you ever saw, like the worst of the worst. Like, could you share some examples that when you saw it, you said like, no, we can just burn this code and that's it. What we can do with it.
I don't have that attitude that I would burn the code. I have seen nasty things, especially in the C++ world. The nastiest things that I have seen were always related to code generators. And I have seen tooling, which I guess by their inventors were well-intentioned. But this was tooling that I remember that was probably invented before it was common to have version control, and then the versioning of the software would be kind of handled by the code generator in a way that was absolutely terribly incompatible with putting Git on top of it. So then that was really nasty, at least from my perspective. I personally didn't like that. What I've seen was a project where you would have, I think it was a hybrid of a GUI builder for certain features, where you would kind of click your software together. You would like write little snippets of code in there, and then it would generate a huge XML file. And like the developer of that software, and I think it was always good intention, it was never intended to become like terrible, decided to generate identifiers, unique IDs, very long unique IDs, completely random whenever you would save the project. And with that workflow, you had the situation that even if you would change the tiniest thing in your project, it was
the code was regenerated.
A huge XML file. Every aspect of the project would be put into the XML file, and all the IDs, all the unique identifiers would be regenerated from scratch. And then that's where you would generate your code out of it. And of course, the generated code was riddled with complexity, all for good reasons, all for a purpose, and all well-intentioned. But it was like this type of thing, to get that under control, that is where I'm, and I usually don't like to advocate for a full rewrite, but that's the kind of stuff that gets me thinking about it. Yeah. That's the kind of horrors that get me thinking about full rewrite. Yeah.
So in general, in most cases, you would say that we can save the software, but there are those extreme cases.
Yeah, if you are not doing that, it can probably be saved. Yeah.
But kind of when you described it kind of sounded like this thing that is getting more popular right now. This code is like no-code approach or low-code approach, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is maybe I'm old. I don't find this no-code approach very novel. I remembered, I don't know, when I was in school, I would take the Microsoft Access database course, where you would essentially do no-code development. So it was always a thing.
I remember. I also used it. I mean, we know how many applications that are running in banks are run on Excel. Really,
it's huge. It's huge. It's still in use. It has been huge back then. It's still ongoing. Yeah. So, and I guess for some type of activity, it makes sense. But I guess if depends on what you want to achieve, it maybe it doesn't make sense, or at one point it will be replaced by something which is written in code if it gets big enough,
Yeah, because let's be honest, all those no-code, low-code approaches are great for like starting the project to see if
and I guess it's a great business case to lock in your users into your platform for whoever is the provider of those tools. I guess it makes sense for them to do that, and it makes sense for people to enjoy the conveniences of that approach. I mean, I have heard also of amazing startups who kind of went really. I know one specific startup. I think it's also operating here in Germany. Who kind of jump-started their business with no-code tools and did a great job of it.
Because let's be honest, the no-code and low-code tools are also becoming more and more robust. What can I say? The things how Zapier changed and how easy it is to use. I also sometimes just prefer to click it rather than write a lot of code that will do the same, but creating this will take like a lot more. Okay, so before we will start wrapping up, I can tell you that Christian has a very long multi. Oh my, it has a really long intro, but let's do it because Christian is really asking very good questions. So we'll go step by step, and let me just check if he finished. Yes. So let's start. In my previous job, I experienced that just barely nobody wanted to touch project considered legacy. So as soon as a project in general was somehow considered legacy because of bad code quality, it would automatically become worse because all of the people just somehow avoid touching it. And if they absolutely had to touch such a project, they tend to get it over and not try to improve it. Instead, rather, they would just make it worse. And soon, most people say, we just need to completely rewrite this from scratch, but I would say in most cases it wouldn't have been necessary. Do you have any advice how to deal with this? Should you just try to avoid to cross that quality threshold in all the project, or should mindset of people change? Honestly, this is really a terrific question. So
it's good. It really hits. It hits hard. It hits hard. Yeah. That's because that's very common to have this situation, and I think I'm a mindset guy. I think it's important to have a mindset, but mindset alone is not enough. You also need to have the tactical skills to actually turn it around. You have to. There are a few basic techniques that you have to understand that these techniques even exist. I think that's the first step. Like you can have motivation, you can have good intentions, but you also need to have the technical skills. And if you have the motivations, if you have the good intentions, and you're still not successful, then you probably have to look into what you need to acquire in terms of technical skills to do it. And I mean, the classic book is the Working with Legacy Code by Michael Fetters, and there the topic is how do I get code under test that is untestable. So that is the first technique, and of course it's not just a single technique. It is a bunch of techniques, and you have to learn a couple of them. And you also have to select which one of those are suited for your specific situation. But I think that's where you need to, if you want to do it. I mean, you can always try to make a code more beautiful. You can try to make it more readable. You can try to add comments and documentations. But I think the hard skill that you need is you need to have at least a couple of techniques in your bag of tricks to introduce tests on code that is in the current way it is untestable. And I think that what you need to understand is also that the techniques to make untestable code are designed to not break anything. So these techniques are very subtle, and sometimes they create ugly code. The simplest example for that is, you have something that I do often. You have a method that calls external dependencies, web services, databases, reads from the file system. What you can do is every external object in that method, every access to file system, you move it into a parameter. And sometimes you get methods with like I don't know, I will exaggerate, 10 parameters, maybe 5 or 3 parameters. And it looks ugly, and people will kind of hate you for doing that because you uglify their code. But it's necessary. It's necessary because by putting the external dependencies into parameters, you can put that method under test. And then you have a starting point. You have like the proverbial leg in the door to start to make changes. And little by little, eventually you will make that code more beautiful later. But first you have to have a test, and then you can make it beautiful. And I think that is also why these, that's where the people come from that propose a big rewrite, that want to make things clean up, beautiful. Sometimes you have to go ugly first, have a test, then go beautiful, and you cannot skip it. So that is something you learn. I think that you must learn these type of techniques, and then you can get started.
So I would say that, especially in Christian case, because he mentioned that, some projects like earn the label of being legacy, is to do everything to prevent from them to earn this label, to start introducing all the stuff related to tests as soon as possible. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to be like covered 100%.
No, not at all. Not at all.
It's all about making it workable and maintainable, and probably having those things together with a nice CI CI integration will make sure that this project will always be able to get updated, to be up to date with whatever is happening, because it all depends on the in which the project is built. And this will make that this project won't get this label of legacy, which in Christian's company seems to be a horrible piece of code that no one wants to touch. So
yeah, I think sometimes the spearhead of this is a legacy project can be that you put like the first test case on that. And sometimes it's hard to get the first test case on that, but maybe that, like, as a symbolic effort, maybe it helps.
Mm-hmm. I will refrain to the to this chat that I had with Luke Dowling about past, and there also was a question how to start testing the untestable code, and he had a very simple solution for it. Start with end-to-end tests to make sure that your website or your code, whatever you have, is working. That's it. So if after changes your code is still working, that's okay-ish.
Yes.
It's the first step. We know that we didn't made it worse. And based on this, we can continue adding more tests in the future. But we have this first step to make sure that, yes, we changed something, it's alive, let's continue.
Yeah, and having an end-to-end test, especially if it's about web application, it is kind of easy, because
it's very easy.
Download the website, the view that you're interested, and you just make a one-to-one comparison to what you get out of it after you've changed. But of course, I mean, these type of acceptance tests are very fragile, but they are very useful to get the effort started, to make the first steps. There should be an essential tool in your toolbox to use. They will not, over time, they will not be enough, and you should not keep them around for too long, but they are great to kick off the effort.
Exactly. I mean, we know that all the testing is about this pyramid, right? Unit, functional, and end-to-end. And we are building the pyramid kind of upside down because we are starting from the top.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes this is totally the best the best way to do so. Yeah, so I think that we really learned a lot. I mean, if we would, for example, have only limited time, we could say that to wrap up everything, how to rescue legacy software, write tests. That's it.
That's it, and then the answer becomes more complicated. But
And
that's
then
the first thing. Yeah.
very quick we run into the famous "it depends," uh, especially probably after a question. But how should I write tests? It depends, and then the whole. But in general, the answer is simple: just write tests. Some tests that will just make sure that your code that you feel that I would say it this way that you feel that before pressing the deploy or release or whatever button, you don't feel afraid, that you just feel confident enough to just add something new to your code. And this will be good enough. It's not perfect, but still, it's the first step. And what we already said at the beginning, that legacy software isn't as much connected with time when it was produced. It's all about quality. So yeah, we can make legacy software modern again.
Yeah, and you don't have to be afraid of it. It can be interesting, and
Oh
I
yes, it
think you get
can.
something out of it. Like you put yourself on the next level of being a developer if you are kind of confident also in your skill. You know that you feel confident that you can actually turn it around, that you can actually do that because you have done it a few
Yes,
times already. If you get to that point, that's always quite impressive.
yes, true. Because it can be difficult. It can be really difficult, especially if the software is used by many people. And I could say that one of the best examples is WordPress right now, the most popular CMS in the world. Uh, it isn't tested enough. It's not fully compatible with the latest PHP version, but still people use it. And making changes to something like this, where every breaking change affects millions, like literally millions of people, is it's really something difficult. So but I really hope that thanks to an enormous help of a lot of people in the community, at some point WordPress will become a modern piece of software again. so so Richard, thank you again for this talk. I really learned a lot.
Thank you for
It
inviting me. Yeah.
it really changed my approach towards legacy software, because like I mentioned, I always thought about it from the also, I mean, quality too, but also this that is also a bit time related. But to be honest, it it doesn't have so much sense. It's much more about quality. And yeah, the only sad part of today's episode was that we both ran out of coffee, which is kind of a shame for a code and coffee episode. But yes, but it happens. It
It
really
happens.
happens. It happens. It's a part of being a developer, because yeah, we drink it a lot. So sometimes we may forget. And what can I tell? Maybe it's time to automate and test our flow of checking how much coffee do we have left, to be always be sure to have at least I would require like 50 grams for 2 portions. Yeah, so when 50 grams, it's like the red alert, go to the shop. And yeah, so thank you again, and thank you everyone for listening to us, and especially Christian, who was very active today, and it was really great to have you with us. And what can I say? See you soon, everyone.
Thank you.